I've started off with, oh, recording, excellent. Right, so I've called this Mimi and Toutou. That will become very clear very soon. Right. So this takes place in what was called Lake Tanganyika, which was to the west of what is now Tanzania. So there's a map of Africa to help you understand where we are. So this is a rather entertaining story about a bit of World War I that plays out in East Africa. So you're going to get some background, and then you're going to get the story of how the Royal Navy took on the Germans in Lake Tanganyika and came out on top. So there you go. Spoiler, it has a happy ending for the Brits. Now, I have a particular interest in this part of the world because I was very fortunate to do a year in voluntary service in Kenya before I went and did a degree in geography. So what a helpful way of learning about the wider world to go and live in someone else's continent. So here we have a very good map, very good black and white map of World War I in East Africa. I'm not going to go through this in any great detail at all. Now, if I can remember how to do this, there we go. There's the red dot. If you look to the left of your screen, there's Lake Tanganyika. The Germans at this stage are occupying German East Africa, which becomes Tanganyika. The British to the north have British East Africa, which becomes Kenya, then gets renamed Kenya at independence. To the west are the Belgians in the Congo. They will feature. To the very south, Portuguese East Africa, which later becomes Zimbabwe. And then, no, I'm getting my countries wrong there. Anyway, no matter. And then the British are bottom left there in Rhodesia, which then that becomes Zimbabwe. So the Germans are effectively surrounded, but at the beginning of this story, they have control of Lake Tanganyika. But I want to give you a bit of background. Before I leave this map, you'll notice that the Germans have got a very good railway. So starting in Dar es Salaam on the coast, it's a very good port, Dar es Salaam. And then there's this railway which comes all the way through, kind of heading pretty much due west to Tabora. Now, missing on the map, and I've added it in red, there's a little railway line that goes all the way through to Kigoma. So it's important that you know that the Germans can get to that lake by rail, because that's how they put their third ship onto the lake. So here's a photograph of German soldiers on duty in Africa. And so this is what the German troops look like. However, the Germans supplement their European troops with a lot of African troops, and their commander in East Africa, or German East Africa, Tanganyika, is a gentleman by the name of Paul von Lettow-Furbeck. And he's quite a character. He's very capable. And it's very interesting. I have a German historian friend who tells me that von Lettow-Furbeck is seen as a bit of a Robin Hood character in Germany. He does very well in East Africa. He ties down a huge number of British and Empire troops with a small number of Germans and a lot of locals. And his exploits have been described as the greatest single guerrilla operation in history and the most successful. So that's what's happening more widely. And here you see a German Askari company. So Askaris is the name we give to native troops, particularly African native troops, fighting for a colonial power. So there's a small number of European officers, German officers, and a large number of local Tanzanians. And the Germans make very good use of their native troops. The British also use native troops, a little bit more cautious. The Germans were more ready to use them. And these guys are are acclimatized to the climate and the terrain, the various diseases, and so on. I think the simple term is that they run rings round us in East Africa in the course of World War One. So the Great War in Africa. This is a map that I would like to understand a lot better. I've got several books to read, but just very simply, these are the kind of movements around Tanzania. The Germans nip into Kenya, or British East Africa as it was then, and disrupt railway lines. But they've got control. What we're talking about today is particularly that they have control of Lake Tanganyika. Now, it's very handy to have control of a lake in the middle of Africa in 1914, because it's like a kind of super highway. Basically, if you've got somewhere where you can land troops, you can put troops on a ship, you can then take them anywhere on the lake. You can attack one place in the north one day, and then the next day attack in the south. It's very, very handy. And the Belgians don't have anything on the lake to match what the Germans have. We'll go into that. On the east side of East Africa, the Germans are having a field day with their commerce raider. So this is in the Indian Ocean. The German ship, the Königsberg, which is a fast ship. I think it's probably a cruiser. I don't fully understand battleships, but you can see its armament there: 10 big guns, 10 little guns, and a couple of small guns, a couple of torpedo tubes as well. This is running around, and it's causing havoc. The Royal Navy are very hacked off because they're losing shipping to the Königsberg. Now, eventually, the Königsberg gets cornered, and the Royal Navy force it up the Rufiji Delta, where it is then attacked. They use a couple of aeroplanes spotting and a couple of little ships with mortars on, so the fire is being directed by aeroplanes, and they eventually damage the Königsberg so much that it's scuttled, and it can't be made to float again. However, the crew and the equipment continue to fight, and they actually connect into our story on Lake Tanganyika. What they did was they stripped the ship of everything that was usable, certainly the guns, all the other stuff, radio equipment, whatever, various officers, and these were taken off the ship and then redeployed in German East Africa. So that the Königsberg was quite a thing, and the Royal Navy were very pleased when it was out of action. So our story is to do with Lake Tanganyika, and as you'll remember from the map I pointed out, that the Germans are controlling it. Britain and Belgium have coastlines, have land adjacent to the lake, and the Belgians and the British would like to control the lake, but the Germans have got a good strong presence there. Now, they've got 2 little gunboats on the lake, the 100-ton Hedwig von Wisman, which is a fairly sizable thing, and then a small thing called the Kingani, which is 45 tons, and we will learn more about those very soon. They also have an additional, that they've got a very big ship that they're going to bring onto the lake, the 800-ton Graf von Goetzen. Now, the Germans were very clever here. They'd thought ahead. They'd recognized that they wanted a stronger presence on the lake, so they commissioned a German shipyard to construct this ship, the Graf von Goetzen. They're to construct it in the German shipyard with a view to immediately deconstructing it and putting it into packing cases, because it's then going to get shipped to Dar es Salaam. But it gets shipped in 3 ships altogether, offloaded, put on the railway, and then taken to Kigani and reconstructed. Now, the British didn't know about the Graf von Gutzen when they got started. The rest of that page there, I won't go into the detail, basically shows that the Germans had knocked the Belgians out of the fighting on the lake by basically destroying out whatever the Belgians had. Now, here we come to one of the great heroes of the piece. This is a gentleman called John R. Lee. Now, John Lee was a big game hunter. He was a British gentleman. He'd travelled extensively in Africa. He'd fought in the Second Boer War, and he had seen the two German ships, so the Kagani and the von Wissmann, and he thought, this is a problem. This is a problem. The Royal Navy would really like to dominate this lake. They'd like to control the lake, and we don't really want the Germans controlling the lake. That would be a problem. I've thought of a way in which they could sort that. Now, Lake Tanganyika is an inland lake, so it's it doesn't have access to the sea. The Germans are fortunate that they've got a rail line, so they've got access to the sea via rail, but the British haven't. We will see how this is overcome in a moment. And John Lee has the bright idea that maybe the British could put maybe two small vessels together, motor launches, and then carry them overland from South Africa to the lake. And that this is what happens. This is the wonderful boy's own story that I shall be sharing with you in the next few minutes. First of all, the gentleman in the photograph is John Lee, but not our John Lee. There's no known photograph, or I've not been able to find a photograph of our John Lee, but this is a John Lee in Africa who was a big game hunter, so we're using his photograph. So he goes to the Admiralty, he shares this idea, and it gets picked up by a gentleman called Spicer-Simson. Spicer-Simson wasn't very good at sharing, and although John Lee shared the idea and then went back to Africa and prepared the route, Spicer-Simson kind of knocks him out of the game, and it's a great pity really, because John Lee's a very important contributor to the story and the victory, but gets overlooked. So I wanted to mention him now. This is the little German ship, the Kingani. But this is a later photograph because you see it's flying a British flag. So spoiler alert, it gets captured. So here's our story. So what's going to happen is the Royal Navy are going to commission two river launches, which get the names Mimi and Toutou, and they're brought overland. You can see here, ... they're landed in South Africa, and then there's this route through Africa to get them onto the lake, and that's the main plot of the story, which I find very enjoyable, very entertaining. And here is our man. Here is the great hero of the piece, Captain Geoffrey Basil Spicer-Simson, who's a bit of a character. He's a hero, but he's certainly a flawed hero. To call him eccentric is just a start. Let's learn a bit more about him. So he originally comes from Tasmania, joins the Royal Navy 1890. He starts off fairly well. So he's good at surveying. He's good at drawing maps of oceans and navigable rivers. So it's a very valuable skill to have for the Royal Navy. Serves in North Borneo and so on. But then his career in actually commanding ships is not brilliant. In 1902, he's posted to a Royal Navy destroyer, which collides with a Liberty boat. So he was the captain. So he takes responsibility, and they think, well, we're not going to trust him with another ship quite yet. So he gets a shore posting at that point. 1914, they gave him command of a contraband control vessel, and he'd only had it for 2 weeks, This is late in 1914. So there is his ship, HMS Niger. It was in port. He was actually off the ship. He was in the hotel looking out of the window, and it was torpedoed in broad daylight. So the Admiralty were very displeased with him and thought that this guy, he's got certain skills. He's quite a capable bloke, he's a very bright bloke, but he's not necessarily very good at being captain of a ship. So we'll give him a desk job. So he's posted to the Admiralty, working with merchant ships in the Admiralty. Now, my summary of his personality, eccentric, I could have underlined that. He was very full of himself. He told exaggerated tales of his own bravery and accomplishments. I shall be recommending a book in a moment, but I'll wave it at the camera. So Mimi and Toutou Go Forth, excellent book by Giles Foden. And if you're encouraged to read more, that's the book I would recommend. And you can read some of his tall stories in there. He didn't want anyone else to get credit when he could claim credit. So our man John Lee, who thought up this idea, who then goes and prepares the route, he gets sidelined by Spicer-Simson. Another little eccentricity of his is his body was covered in tattoos of butterflies and snakes, and that the local people in Africa were highly fascinated by this. He would actually have a bath in the open air, and they would watch him have a bath and watch him ripple his muscles. And so he also, when he was in the centre of Africa, he went a bit native and wore a skirt because he found it more comfortable. So there we go. We won't knock him for that. Now, here are the two books. There's not a huge amount written about this. So the picture on there, Giles Foden, Mimi and Toutou's Big Adventure. I've got the other edition of it there. Highly recommended. The other book is Lord of the Loincloth. There's my copy there. It's a lot thicker. It's a big, heavy book. So I've not read this all the way through. It goes into a lot more detail. Now, the Admiralty acquire these two river launches. I'll show you a photograph in a moment. And they said to Simpson, sorry. So Simpson's in the Admiralty. Lee goes and gives his story. Nobody wants to volunteer, but Simpson overhears about this and he thinks, here's an opportunity. Here's an interesting adventure. So he volunteers. So that's how he gets the job. So I should have said that bit before. And he wants the Navy say, well, you're in command of this. You can choose the names of these two river launches. So he says, right, okay, I'd like to call them Cat and Dog. And the Royal Navy say, you can't call naval vessels Cat and Dog. You're a daft thing. You're not calling them Cat and Dog. So he says, well, all right. And so he goes away and thinks about it. He says, how about calling them Mimi and Toutou? Oh, yeah, that's fine. You can call them Mimi and Toutou. Now, if you're good at French, you'll know this translates as meow and bow wow. So there you go. You call them that, you can't call them Cat and Dog. And there we have Mimi in the foreground and Toutou in the background. They are motor launches, and they are commissioned and from the Thornycroft shipyard. And here they are in trials on the River Thames. So what they've done is they've added armaments to the guns. So you can see there the quick firing gun at the front and the machine gun at the back. It's intriguing. In the books they call it a Maxim gun, but I don't think it's a Vickers, but anyway, no matter. That is what a Royal Navy quick firing 3-pounder gun looks like. So on a small ship, this is a very handy bit of weaponry. And there is a map of the adjusted river launch, the design plans there, 40 foot long. So the idea is that these are going to be commissioned, they're going to be set up, and then they're going to be packed for transport by ship and then by rail. And this is this wonderful story that I'm going to share with you. It's quite something. So this is the route. This is thought up by John Lee, and I'll just kind of go through it with particular emphasis on the trickiest bit. So England to Cape Town by ship, that's fairly straightforward. That's over 6,000 miles. Cape Town to Elizabeth by rail, that's nearly 2,000 miles. Then there's a smaller railway line that isn't as solid, 140 miles, Elizabethville to Fungurumi. Now then, this is the trickiest bit here. There we go. I've got the red marker here. Fungurumi to Sanskiskia overland. So they're pulling vehicles, pulling carts by oxen. There's a lot of African porters. There's thousands of Africans involved, and traction engines. They have to go 120 miles, which includes actually going over a mountain range. This is extraordinary stuff. Then at the other end of that, there's a 15-mile rail journey. Then the Lualaba River. Well, you'd think a motor launch would be all right on a river. Well, it's not. It's a bit tricky, but we'll come to that. Then the final 175 miles are by rail. So we're going to talk about the journey. We're going to talk about the people involved. So Spicer-Simson gets all the credit, but of course there's a lot of people involved. There's about 20 odd in the group. And here's the photograph of them looking all very smart. We know that this is later in the story because if you look down there at the front, there's a goat. We'll discover where the goat comes into the story soon. So there's Spicer-Simson there with a whole range of people who are specially recruited for this mission. Just a selection of those people. We've got a medical doctor, Dr. Hanschel. So he's not military, but he's come along for the adventure. Sub-Lieutenant Tyra, who was an early aviator who had a fondness for Worcester sauce. That's an unnecessary detail. Tubby Eastwood had worked with Thomas Cook as a travel agent in the Congo, so he was very useful for knowing his way around Africa. He was the paymaster and the direct clerk to Spicer-Simson. A couple of engine room artificers, so Lamont and Cobb, Lamont from Glasgow. Then we have a Lieutenant Wainwright, transport officer, who'd driven steam locomotives on African railways. So he was very useful when it came to the traction engines pulling the carts over the overland route. Then we have Waterhouse, who's a gun layer, and there's a second Scotsman. We've lost the name of the second Scotsman, but he'd been a fisherman in Donegal. So what a mixed group of people. And here we have a rather more helpful map showing this particular route. So we're going to show the route. They're going to show you some photographs of the detail. So they've come to South Africa. They've come up the railway line. Here's my red. So they come through Rhodesia. They've got to Fungurumi in the Belgian Congo. This is the trickiest bit, the overland bit to Sanskiskia. That's really hard going. That's a story in itself. Then a bit more railway, then along the Lualaba River, and then there's this short trip by rail to get them onto the lake. Imperial War Museum have a small number of wonderful photographs. So there we see one of the launches on a railway carriage with the chap sitting there, and what a lot of stores, because the basically have got to take everything with them, and then somehow manage to be self-sufficient, however long this is going to take. A very large number of natives pressed into service. And here we have part of the overland trek. Spicer-Simson himself was often on his bicycle going ahead to check the route. Now, this route had been cleared by John Lee in advance. So they had an idea of where they were going, and a route had been cleared. But it was quite tricky. There's a whole load of difficult terrain. There's water courses to be traversed and so on. And we see here one way of getting through a watercourse. What a huge amount of timber has been involved with laying the trunks, as it were, to make I think it's called a corrugated road. So there's a huge amount of human effort gone into that. And that there we see them traveling along with the local labourers helping out. Somewhere along the line, they pick up a little chimpanzee, Josephine. So it's almost a circus, really. That photograph is labelled Spicer-Simson, and I'm not too sure whether it is or not. I think Spicer-Simson occasionally shaved his beard off, but it's said to be Spicer-Simson having tea with his chimpanzee. Now, this is a photograph I found on a website. I think it's just worth reading a little bit of this to kind of catch some of the detail of what happens. Difficult conditions, high temperatures. The soil has a lot of mica in it, so it's actually very strongly reflective. So they have effectively snow blindness in sunshine. Unexpected swamps and forest fires. There's animal holes appear in this newly made road, so that's a problem. Spicer-Simson goes ahead on his bike, and 2 weeks in, and with 30 miles to go, the trailers that have been made to carry the motor launches collapsed and were seen to be unrepairable. So what they had to do was then take the trailers that they'd used for the wood supply for the locomotive and convert those to carry the launches instead. That was a 5-day delay. The muddy season was approaching and they'd still got to cross the mountains. So, oh dear. I'm sparing some of the detail, but this is my most favourite incident. The doctor, while they're going along, the doctor tries his best to help people, and he hears that there's a Belgian trader in a mission station who's got malaria. So he goes into the bush to deal with this gentleman and do the best he can for him, and takes him out of the mission station, and then thinks this mission station is going to be a problem because there's malaria. If anyone goes and stays there, they're just going to get malaria. So tell you what, I'll do a bit of preventative stuff. I'll just simply burn it down. We'll get rid of it. Won't be a problem. Well, it's not a bright idea to be setting fire to bits of African bush because a lot of it is very dry. And although this was some distance from where Mimi and Toutou were, the bush catches fire and the fire spreads and it actually gets to the expedition. So they have quite an exciting time saving everything, but they survive. Somehow they manage to cope with the fire. Not long afterwards, an officer with the Belgian army turns up. I think it's actually Danish. Lieutenant Fraser-Leben turns up with 20 Askaris. He's turned up out of the blue. It's the Belgian army turning up. And Spicer-Simson thinks, oh, we don't really need any help. But it's very thoughtful of the Belgians to turn up to try and help us. So he does the decent thing, and he invites him for dinner. And then after dinner, Spicer-Simson thanks the Fraser-Leben for bringing men to guard Mimi and Toutou. And he replies, "You think we're here to protect you? No, mon commandant, we're here to protect the Congo from you." So the Belgians knew about the fire, and they knew that these crazy British were coming through, and what could happen next? Oh, heavens knows. So the Belgians have sent a group to keep an eye on them. And he then goes on to say, "You English have a genius for amateurism. That's what makes you so dangerous. Who but amateurs could have dreamed up an expedition like this?" I'm a toy soldier wargamer myself, and I'm highly amused that you can actually get a 28mm metal toy soldier of Spicer-Simson. There he is in his skirt. So the expedition continues. They get up a mountain. At this stage in this photograph, the traction engines can't pull firmly enough, so they're using a block and tackle and oxen. You can see there to actually pull the motor launches through. And there's that map again. They eventually use the red dot. They've got over the overland bit. There's now the railway, and then there's going to be the river Lualaba. Let's say it properly. And there's a photograph of one of the launches in the Lualaba. And it's not a terribly deep river, and there's sandbanks, and that's problematic as well. However, eventually they make it to the next bit of railway, and they get to the Lake Tanganyika. So here's a little bit of detail. This is HMS Toutou. You can see it's got the 3-pound Hotchkiss gun with a machine gun at the back, 40 foot long, 8 tons weight, 18 knots. So that's the bit to remember, 18 knots. It can go a speed of 18 knots. This now is the smaller German ship, the Kingani, which is 56 foot long, 45 tons. That can go 8 knots. So Mimi and Toutou can go 18 knots. This can only go 8 knots. So if you can manage it, if you can maneuver it, you can outmaneuver the Kingani. It's got a small Hotchkiss revolving cannon, just 1.5 inches. So what happens is that the British make camp. They conceal their ships, and the Germans are kind of hearing that something's happening. That the local peoples are the Hollow people, and it's actually just over the Christmas period, 26th of December. The Kingani has come around the lake, so what happens is the Kingani comes now. The Kingani is going to be coming this way here. Mimi and Toutou are launched, and they get behind it, and you can see from here that the Kingani is trying to head in a northeasterly direction. Mimi and Toutou are behind and firing their guns, and they do a fair bit of they do a bit of damage to the Kingani, such that it has to stop, and it is captured. And the British are rather pleased, and they get possession of this little boat, this little ship, and they call it HMS Fifi. So we've got Mimi, Toutou, and Fifi. Wonderful names. And there's a period photograph of I think that's Fifi there. Now, Spicer-Simson, what a rather odd gentleman. There he is on the left. There's Spicer-Simson wearing his skirt. He was more comfortable in a skirt. That's fine. And on board on board the ship, the Fifi, there was a little goat. So there's the go back. There's the little goat there on the right-hand side. So maybe the Germans had it along as a bit of a mascot, or maybe it was going to be dinner in a few days' time. But he's adopted by the British. We do like our animals, don't we? So what happens next? Well, at this point, the local people are hugely impressed with Spicer-Simson. They think maybe he's some kind of god character, and little clay statues of him begin to appear around the area. They didn't care for the Germans, so here's a British gentleman, a British admiral, who appears to be working magic, and so he gains great status amongst the Hollow people. That image there is an example of Hollow artifact that I found on the internet. Now, the next boat that they need to deal with is a slower moving thing. It's a lot bigger. So it's the Hedwig von Wisman. It's a converted vessel again, 120 feet long, 57 tons. It can only go 6 or 7 knots. So Mimi and Toutou are somewhat faster. It's got more guns. It's got 3 1.5-inch Hotchkiss, a revolving cannon, and 2 additional cannons. This eventually comes out onto the lake, and I'll just stay on that slide. And I couldn't find a map of the fight between the two, but the Mimi Toutou with Fifi following behind managed to catch up with the Hedvig von Wisman, put a good few artillery shells through it, and sink it. So that's gone. So now Mimi, Toutou, and Fifi, as it were, have possession of the lake. So they think, however, the British now, to their distress, discover that there's yet another vessel on the lake. They didn't know about this. This is the Graf von Goertzen. This is the ship that the Germans had commissioned in Germany and had sent packaged up in boxes and then reconstructed at the shoreline of Lake Tanganyika. And the Graf von Goertzen is a substantial ship. So 1,200 tons. It can go 8 to 9 knots. So it's not that fast, but it's got a 4-inch gun, a 3-inch gun, 2 1.5-inch Hotchkiss, and a revolving cannon. Now, I'm afraid at this point, Spicer-Simson has done very, very well. He's been recognised. The Admiralty are very pleased with him because, of course, they're in wireless contact with the Admiralty. But now his courage begins to wane. He realises just how dangerous this thing is, and he chooses not to go out and fight it. He's making excuses. The biggest gun on the Graf von Goertzen had been salvaged from the Königsberg that we saw earlier in the talk. So there's a big gun which Spicer-Simson is wary of, and he basically just simply avoids it. Now the Belgians bring in some aeroplanes. They're using planes for bombing raids, and they're attacking the harbour of Kigoma. Now they don't actually damage the von Goertzen, but the Germans have decided that they don't want to risk this ship going out onto the lake again. They stripped the guns from her because they could be used elsewhere, and they actually prepared the ship so it could be salvaged in the future, and they scuttled the ship. So Leto Furbeck ordered that the Goertzen was scuttled. There's Spicer-Simson again. He basically goes into decline, and we would recognise that he has a bit of mental health issues. He has severe depression and so on. So he's had his moment of fame, and he basically, as it were, kind of fades out of the story. Then he does reappear later. He does various things later in life, and collects quite a nice collection of medals. So there is his service order group, which went up for auction in 2010, it was sold for £40,000. So that's quite impressive. Now, going back to Leto von Furbeck, he had quite a time in Africa. He was never defeated by the British. So come November 1918, the war comes to an end. There's a ceasefire. There's an armistice and a ceasefire. But as far as he's concerned, he's not been defeated. He wants to continue fighting. They have to send the German ambassador to speak with him and say, look, we know you've done very well, but Germany has been defeated. You do need to surrender to the British. So there's this wonderful African picture of the Germans surrendering to the British. Von Leto Furbeck then returns to Germany, and as I mentioned before, he comes across as a bit of a Robin Hood character. greatly admired. Of course, the Germans are not defeat. The German army isn't defeated in the field at the end of World War One. The Germans surrender because there's been a change of government, and the people who are now in power are very keen to bring the war to an end. And so that the German army feels that they've been stabbed in the back, and so on. So there's Leto Furbeck at a parade in Berlin in 1919 on his horse, being greatly admired by the German people. He's one of our great heroes from the war. He did very well in East Africa. Now his continuing story is quite interesting. He gets involved in politics, particularly in Bavaria. There he is as a guest of General von Kluge in 1935. Now, Hitler was very, very keen to have Leto Furbeck on side to make good use of him as a popular German military commander. But to his credit, Leto Furbeck, despite being right-wing, despite being a strong monarchist, absolutely hated the Nazis. He had no time for the Nazis at all. And so when Hitler approached him in 1935 to offer him the job as ambassador to the court of St. James, he declined. He declined rather firmly. Now, I'm not sure whether I should put the word in. So when this detail was checked in 1960 by Charles Miller when he was writing the book, he asked a gentleman who knew Leto Furbeck, did he actually say to Hitler that he could go fuck himself? Sorry, I said the word. And the reply was, yes, that's right, but actually he wasn't that polite. It was absolutely brilliant. So coming back to Africa, the Graf von Goertzen had been scuttled, and the ship was actually raised again. The ship could be reused. The engines and the boilers were still usable, rehabilitated, and come 1927, the ship went back into service under the name merchant vessel Liemba. And coming back to the book with Giles Foden actually went out to Africa and travelled on the Liemba. He said it wasn't terribly comfortable. Now, if all this sounds vaguely familiar, you might be thinking of the film The African Queen, which in some ways is based on this story. It's a while since I've seen the film, but it roughly has the idea that there's a couple of British or even American heroes who wish to destroy a big German ship, and they're prepared to fill their ship full of explosives to sail it in, and that's the African Queen. And if you've seen it, you'll know how that ends. That by accident, the African Queen floats into the ship, which is really meant to be the Graf von Goertzen, and explodes. So I'll finish on a sunset. There's Lake Tanganyika at sunset. So there we go. I hope you found that entertaining. It's one of my favorite stories. James, you might like to continue recording or whatever. We could take questions now.
Yeah, exactly. That was thank you very much, Tim. Exactly what I was going to say. Does anybody have any questions for Tim about this fascinating battle with some bizarre characters?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Chris. Yes. Hello.
Chris, yeah, I found it fascinating, and just per chance, it's not really a question, I'm afraid, but I was in a book club for a while, and people around in the book club take turns to nominate a book, and my one was The African Queen. Now, I nominated The African Queen for two reasons. One, way back in the 50s, I'd seen the film with Humphrey Bogart. It was a great, cool hero at that time. And I just happened to be in the library and I saw The African Queen, and I didn't realize being written by C.S. Forrester.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I did that. I did the book, not the film, which was enjoyable. But the other reason I was interested, in the late 20s, about a decade after the action taking place here, my father was in Tanganyika building a
Right.
factory. So I've got a lot of photographs, although they're a different part of Tanganyika. Some of the pictures you put up were so reminiscent of the ones my father took. So yeah, fascinating. I did enjoy that.
Good. Excellent. I see Richard is unmuted. So, oh, hello, Richard. You see, you know.
Very, very interesting talk, and
Thank you.
we both loved it. I have one question, and maybe it's apocryphal, but I understood that they had a little trial of the main armament of either Mimi or Toutou and trials on the Thames.
Yes.
The breech block of the forward gun was not secured and knocked Spicer-Simson over the side. Is there any truth in this tale?
I think that's correct. Yes. That's a wonderful bit of deal. They realised they needed to make it more secure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well remembered.
As the name would say, Nigat Bravo Zulu, which means not well done.
Indeed. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yes.
Good to see
Anybody
someone
else
with a big
some
library there,
questions?
Richard.
Yes.
Mm.
Good. Well, if there's no more questions,
Oh, well, I see Elizabeth is unmuted, so I don't know whether Elizabeth has a...
Elizabeth, do you have a question?
Yes.
No.
Oh,
Oh, there.
Oh, no, she's
No, she doesn't. She's
muted
muted herself.
herself again.
There we go.
Good.
Right.
Good. Okay, well, thank you very much, Tim. That was an excellent talk as always.
Oh, bless you.
The next talk, I've forgotten which one it is now. I think it's the Battle of Britain with Rick Peacock Edwards, whose father was a Battle of Britain pilot. He was a South African who came over and fought with the Brits, and he will be talking firsthand about his father's experience during the Battle of Britain, and so that's on the first. I think it's at the beginning of January.
It's the 4th of January. I've checked
4th
up
of
on the
January.
webpage. Yes. So
Yeah.
so it's Battle of Britain with Rick Peacock Edwards, and then Dan Hill in February, which on the
That's
Battle of Luce.
The Battle of Luce. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to enormously. Yeah.
which my grandfather was in. So, well, if I may, I would like to wish you all a very happy Christmas, and hopefully see you in the new year.
Very
Thank
good.
you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, James. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
All righty.
It's goodbye from him.
Thank you, Tim. That was
Yes.
excellent. Thank you so much.
To all of you.
Thank you.
Take
Thanks for
care. Happy
coming.
Christmas. Cheers.
Yes, God bless.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, people.
Bye.
bye.
Nice.